So we have a challenging game so far. We have multiple levels that are challenging themselves. We have lava, we have spikes, we have a dangerous enemy, we have coins that are trying to force us to explore the whole of the world, and then a portal which keeps on moving us forward. So it's a challenging game. Could we make it any harder? Yes, of course we can. More enemies. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a system set up so that each time we level up, we have a new enemy. So we got this little red character over here. He appears right from the word go, of course. What we want to happen is that each time we level up, we get another copy of him running around the world. So by the time we get to level 5, we'll have 5 enemies bouncing around. Level 10, we'll have 10 enemies. It'll get very, very challenging. So this is what we're going to be doing. Now, there are a couple of different ways that we could do this, one of which I would not recommend and one that I will, and in fact, that'll be the one that I'll show you. So the one that I wouldn't recommend is duplicating your enemy. So by right-clicking on it and duplicating that enemy, there we are, because you'd end up, if you had 10 levels, by having 10 copies of that sprite, which itself gets a bit fiddly. You've not got a lot of room down here, and yes, you can start scrolling, but who wants to have to scroll up and down too much in the sprite area? Well, the other problem is that if you decide later on you want to change some of the code for your enemy, so instead of moving 2 steps, you want to move them 4 steps to speed them up or maybe even slow them down, you're going to have to change the code for every single copy of your enemy sprite. And that gets fiddly and you probably end up making mistakes. So instead, what we're going to do is use a system built into Scratch using these blocks here, or at least some of these blocks, because you'll see these are all to do with clones. What is a clone? Well, a clone is a copy of something. So a clone is a copy, a duplicate copy of something. Now, I know I said we're not going to be duplicating the sprite, and we're not. But what we are going to do is to have the sprite make copies of itself, or the game make copies of that enemy as we play it. So they won't appear down here, but they will appear in the game. Let's see how we do that. So the first thing is, when do we want a new enemy to appear? Well, whenever we change level, whenever we go up to a new level. Which sprite is it in our game that knows when we go up a new level? Because it's the one broadcasting that message, new level. Can you remember? Well done if you said the portal, because it's the portal which is the one that says if the player is touching the portal, then change the level by 1 and broadcast that message, new level. So it's the portal that is saying, yep, this is time for a new level. So the portal is going to make a copy, a clone of the enemy sprite. How do we do that? It's very straightforward. In the control section, down near the bottom, you have this little block that says create a clone of. At the moment it says myself. We don't want 2 portals, but if we click on that drop down, we can choose enemy. So create a clone of the enemy. So this makes a copy of the enemy, and we can put that into that section there. So if we're touching the player, then we do all these 4 things. We play the sound, we change the variable level, we broadcast the message so that everything else knows what to do, and we create a cloned copy of the enemy. Okay, that's fine, but what about these cloned copies? Are they going to have all this code? Yes, they are. They will have all of the same code as the main enemy, which is a problem. Because, of course, this code here, all this code, only runs when the green flag is clicked. And this code here only runs when the green flag is clicked. That's a problem, isn't it? Because how are we going to get the cloned copies to tell if they're touching the player, cackle, move around, move into different positions? How are we going to get all this code to run? Well, fortunately, in the clone section of the control, there is this block here, same sort of shape as the green flag. So when I start as a clone, we can do all of this same code. Let's just duplicate that code. So there's a copy of that block there. Let's bring it down and say when I start as a clone, do all the same code. And we need to do the same thing for all this here. All this is for moving around, for bouncing off the platform. So we need all that code to run as well whenever the enemy starts as a clone. So let's bring the when I start as a clone block. Let's duplicate all of that code there and pop it underneath. So we now have, if I zoom out, we now have 5 blocks of code for our enemy. We've got the one that says when it's game over, then hide it and stop everything. We've got this block of code that says for the main enemy, the original enemy, when the game starts, check to see if we're touching the player and if we are, broadcast caught. And the copy of that code underneath saying when I start as a clone, do the same thing. Check to see if we're touching the player and if we are, broadcast the message caught. Over here, we've got the code for bouncing around off the walls. And down here, when I start as a clone, do the same bouncing around off the walls. So if we run the game now, so let's go full screen again and we run the game, you see we have the original enemy. And I think just what I might do here is cheat a little bit just to show you things, speed things up. So I'm actually going to move the portal right over here so that it is ridiculously easy for me to get to each new level. Game designers are allowed to cheat. So here we are, I'm on level 1. You can see there is one enemy there bouncing around. And if I jump onto the platform, onto the portal, there you see we have a cloned copy of the enemy. And it's bouncing around. It's got the same script, same code, so it's bouncing around in the same way. But of course, because we're using random numbers to decide which direction the enemy bounces when it hits the wall, they're going to be bouncing around in different places. Let's now jump back into the portal and jump to level 3. And there we are. We've now got 3 enemies bouncing around. And if I jump into the portal again, we've now got 4 enemies bouncing around inside that maze. So you can see how by adding each of those clones, we don't have, if I come back out of this full screen, we don't have any more enemies inside our game design window here. But we have got copies within the game. They're all duplicates. And when we stop the game and we run the game, we're back to just that one enemy again. And if we want to change the code for the enemy, let's say it's moving a little bit too quickly, so I can reduce the number of steps from 2 to 1. Don't forget to do it down here for the clone as well. And if I run the game now, you'll see that the enemy is moving slower, and so is the clone. So the clones are now moving a little bit slower. That sliding bridge is causing a little bit of a problem there. But you can see how by changing one line, I was able to affect all the clone copies. So even if I get onto level 10 and I end up with 10 clones, then we're going to end up with, there we are, I haven't got any more levels now. But you see each of those cloned copies now is moving slowly. So we can very easily create an increasing number of enemies. So that's how to create cloned copies of enemies. You can play around with that idea, add it into your game if you want to. And at this point, I'm going to stop in showing you how to add more and more features to your game, because I think you have probably enough. What's important, though, at this point is that you don't just simply copy everything that I've done. You do 2 things. You make decisions based on what I've shown you. So I've shown you how to make the floor is lava, but you can use the same method to create spikes or to make an electric barbed wire fence or some other weird thing, radioactive goo. You know, it's up to you. You can use the ideas that I've taught you to create your own game with its own theme, its own story, and using your imagination. So you're creating your own version of the game. That's really, really important. The other thing, of course, is that hopefully you've learned quite a bit about programming. You've learned about variables, including Boolean variables. You've learned about loops, those forever loops that go on and on forever, and also those loops that repeat a certain number of times. We've also looked at something called selection statements, which is where we ask questions. If This is the case, do this, otherwise do something else. So we've looked at that. We've looked at clones, we've looked at sensing and collision detection, we've looked at all sorts of things. And so those skills you've learned, you can now start to use to come up with your own ideas. So what else can you possibly do? What else can you come up with that you could add to your game? And that's where it gets really exciting. When you come up with an idea, you think, well, how do I do that? What do I know already that would let me create that? And you start to experiment, and it will go wrong. You know, things won't work perfectly. That's programming. But eventually you'll get it right. You'll get close to it. You'll start to bounce ideas off a friend, perhaps. And when you make that breakthrough, when you've come up with an idea and you've coded it and you've got it working, and nobody else has got that, that's awesome. That's where your game stands out. That's when people start talking about your game and wanting to play it and share it. Talking of playing and sharing, in the next tutorial, I will show you how to publish your game and share it so that the whole world can see your game and can play it and comment, leave feedback, and enjoy what you've created. So when you're ready, I'll show you in that tutorial.